3 races into the 2026 season, and Formula One needed an emergency meeting because drivers were furious, fans were cancelling subscriptions, and Oliver Bearman walked away from a 50G crash that should never have happened in the first place. F1 spent years building these regulations. They had a plan: attract manufacturers, go greener, make the cars smaller, and racing closer. On paper, it made sense. In reality, they built something that the best drivers in the world are calling anti-racing. Super clipping. That's the word of the 2026 season so far, and if you've been watching, you know exactly what it looks like. A car flying down the straight, and then suddenly it slows. Not because the driver is braking, because the battery ran out. That is what happens when you build a car around a 50-50 split between combustion and electric power, and then cap how much energy the battery can hold. The drivers push flat out, the battery depletes faster than it can recover, and the car just loses around 500 horsepower mid-straight. In a sport where tenths of a second matter, that is not a minor inconvenience. That is the racing falling apart in real time. And it gets worse, because when one car runs out of electrical power and the car behind still has it, you get massive speed differentials on the same piece of track. That is exactly what caused the Bearman crash at Suzuka. Colapinto lost electrical power, Bearman didn't. He arrived at his rear at a closing speed of 50 km per hour. 50G impact. He walked away with a bruised knee. He was lucky, and the worst part? Lando Norris already warned everyone before it happened that there was going to be a big accident. He was right. But the safety issue is only part of the problem. The bigger issue is what these regulations do to the actual racing. Positions swap, not because a driver outbraked someone or found a better line. They swap because one car has more battery than the other at any given moment. Norris described overtaking Lewis Hamilton without meaning to. His energy deployed and the position just changed. Neither of them really chose it. Then there is qualifying, and this one genuinely gets to me. Qualifying is supposed to be the purest session of a race weekend. One lap, no excuses, everything on the line. That is what makes it special. In 2026, drivers cannot just attack. If they deploy too aggressively early in the lap, the battery runs out before the finish line and they lose half a second on the back straight. So, they manage. They coast through corners that should be flat. They lift on runs to the line that should be maximum commitment. Charles Leclerc called it a joke. Fernando Alonso said his chef could drive the car through certain corners because driver skill is barely relevant anymore. Norris said it hurt his soul to watch the speed disappear on the straight. And Nigel Mansell, who drove cars that genuinely tried to kill him, said Formula One needs to give more power back to the driver's elbow and less to the computers. The FIA already tried to fix qualifying before Suzuka. They reduced the maximum recoverable energy per lap from 9 megajoules to 8. It made almost no difference. Cars were still super clipping through 130R. Colapinto lost 98 km per hour through that corner in practice, not because he drove badly, because the hybrid system completely cut power while he was in one of the fastest corners on the calendar. There is also a rule that makes all of this worse and barely gets talked about. To enter energy-saving mode after a corner, the driver has to keep the throttle above 98% for a full second. If the rear steps out slightly, and they lift even a fraction to catch the car, the sequence resets. The computer does not understand that the driver just saved the car from spinning. It just sees that the threshold was missed and burns another full second of battery. Leclerc lost half a second on the back straight in China because of exactly this. He had a tiny snap of oversteer, caught it brilliantly, and was punished for it by a line of code. That is what Verstappen means when he calls it anti-racing. The regulations are not just making the cars harder to drive, they are actively punishing drivers for driving like Formula One drivers. I want you to think about 130R for a second, not the 2026 version where drivers are lifting and coasting through it to charge a battery. The real version. Schumacher flat through there with a screaming engine. Verstappen and Norris trading tenths in qualifying. Fernando Alonso overtaking Schumacher. That corner was a statement. It separated the drivers who had it from the ones who did not. That is what Formula One used to reward. Commitment, bravery, the willingness to go somewhere the physics said you probably should not, and trust your instinct to bring it back. Qualifying was the session where that was most visible. No strategy, no tire saving, no teammate to follow, just one lap and everything you had. And it wasn't just qualifying. Think about what a proper overtake used to look like. Even in the ground effect era, when the cars were frankly too big and too heavy, you still had moments of genuine bravery into braking zones. A driver committing to a move that might not come off and making it work through skill and nerve. The current cars replaced that energy with deployment modules. And yes, I understand why it was designed that way. DRS was always a bit artificial too. A driver pressing a button and suddenly having a straight line speed advantage, it's not exactly pure racing. But at least with DRS, you knew when it was coming, you knew the zones, and the driver still had to execute the move. What we have now is positions changing because a battery happened to be fuller at a specific moment. What really gets me is that the thing fans loved most about this sport were never really about the technology. They were about the human element inside the technology. We watched the cars because of what the drivers had to do to make them go fast. The V10 era produced incredible racing because those cars were genuinely on the edge, and qualifying was a genuine test of who was willing to go furthest. The V8 era gave us moments that still get watched millions of times because someone did something in a braking zone that seemed impossible. Even in the years I was most frustrated with Formula 1, and I've made videos about this, the one thing that always kept me watching was qualifying, because whatever was wrong with the race, qualifying still delivered. A driver on a flat-out lap with everything to lose is always worth watching. The 2026 regulations took that away from us. I get the argument for the new manufacturers. Audi is here, Ford is back, Cadillac is on the grid. 5 power unit suppliers is the healthiest engine landscape in years. That is genuinely good for the long-term stability of the sport, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. The sustainable fuel side of it makes sense too. I've said before that you can run sustainable fuels in a V8 and get the same environmental benefit without turning the racing into a battery management exercise. But I understand why they went this way. What I do not understand is why nobody stopped to ask what the sport would feel like from inside the car, because the drivers are telling us now, and what they're describing is a sport that punishes instinct, removes bravery from qualifying, and turns the most exciting corners on the calendar into places where you slow down to save energy. That is not Formula 1, and I hate it. Verstappen did not hold back. Well, he never does, which is part of why people listen to him. He called the regulations anti-racing. He said anyone who enjoys them does not understand motorsport. He described them as Formula E on steroids. And then, after Suzuka, reports came out that he's seriously considering his future in the sport. For someone who has dominated Formula 1 the way he has, that's not a throwaway comment. That is a 4-time world champion telling you something is genuinely wrong. Norris was almost as direct. He went from driving what he called the best car ever made in Formula 1 to what he described as probably the worst. He said you spend more time looking at the steering wheel than the road. He said overtaking felt artificial because you weren't really in control of when it happened. And he was right, because he proved it himself by passing Hamilton without meaning to. The fan reaction matches. In Germany, viewership is down 21%, Austria 36%, France 43%, Spain is down 49% in a single season. A German survey found that 74% of responders want immediate regulation changes. People are posting screenshots of their cancelled F1 TV subscriptions on social media as a statement. Comment sections across YouTube are full of people saying they now only watch highlights, that they used to clear their Sunday for a race, and now they check the result on their phone. People who've watched this sport for 20 years saying it no longer feels like the thing they fell in love with. Battery management with tires is one line I keep seeing, and honestly, it's hard to argue with. I'm one of them. My love for the sport, it's at an all-time low. Now, I know the counter-argument. Italy is up 36% because Antonelli is leading the championship, and, well, he's Italian. The US numbers on Apple TV are up year on year. YouTube views are double compared to the same point last year. But is that because of the interest in support, or because everybody watches highlights? But here's the thing, the fans who are leaving are not the casual ones. They're the core audience, the people who understand what they're watching, who care about the technical side, who have been there through the boring years and stayed because qualifying on a Saturday was always worth it. Losing those fans is a different kind of problem than not growing in new markets. You can bring in 1 million new viewers from Drive to Survive, and it does not replace the energy and knowledge and passion of the fanbase you built the sport on. And even some of the positive voices are complicated. Hamilton called the racing the best he's experienced, and I respect that. But Hamilton is in a Ferrari that is clearly the second best car on the grid, and he's fighting for a championship at the end of his career. Of course it feels exciting from where he's sitting. George Russell said to give it time and that drivers always complain, which is also fair, but drivers do not usually complain like this, or this early, or this consistently, from this many different teams. The mood right now is not the normal regulation change grumbling. This feels different, angrier, more personal, because the thing that is being taken away is not a technical preference, it's the feeling that what you are watching is real. After 3 races and an emergency meeting, they agreed on a set of changes to be implemented from Miami onwards, and some of them are actually meaningful. On qualifying, they reduced the maximum permitted recharge from 8 megajoules down to 7, and they increased the peak superclipping power from 250 kilowatts to 350. The idea is that if the car can harvest energy faster through superclipping, drivers do not need to lift and coast as much. In theory, this means less coasting, more commitment, and driver skill. On the race side, they capped the maximum power available through the boost system at 150 down to 350. The goal is to reduce the kind of sudden speed differential between 2 cars on the same straight that turns Suzuka into a near disaster. Whether it limits overtaking opportunities at the same time is a question nobody can answer yet. They also fixed the race starts, which were a separate issue. Cars were using battery energy during formation lap burnouts and arriving at the grid with empty systems. There is now a reset of the energy counter at the start of the formation lap, a new system that automatically triggers minimum power deployment if a car launches abnormally slowly, and warning lights on the car to alert drivers behind. Sensible fixes for something that should have been caught before Melbourne. And for wet conditions, they adjusted tire blanket temperatures for intermediates, reduced maximum ERS deployment in low-grip conditions, and simplified the rear light systems for better visibility. All of which makes sense, and none of which addresses the fundamental problem. So, the FIA listened, moved quickly, and got everyone to agree. That is worth acknowledging. 3 races in and they're already implementing fixes with unanimous stakeholder support. That is faster than they've moved before. But they are patches, not solutions. The fundamental problem is the 50-50 power split. When your battery runs out and you lose around 500 horsepower, that is not something you solve by adjusting how fast the battery recharges. That is a problem with the architecture itself, and the FIA knows this. There are already discussions about changing the split, increasing fuel flow limits, reducing maximum electrical deployment, but that is next year at the earliest, and it requires teams to redesign engines they've just built. What frustrates me is that this was predictable. Verstappen said in 2023 that it would be a disaster. Multiple drivers raised concerns before the season started. The FIA had simulated data that showed the energy management problems. They knew, and they went ahead anyway, because the manufacturer argument and the sustainability argument were too big to slow down for. I understand that. Audi, Ford, Ferrari, Honda, and Mercedes all built their programs around these regulations. You can't just rip that up because the racing feels artificial 3 races in. But you can be honest about what you got wrong and move faster to fix it. The Miami changes are a step. Whether they're enough to make qualifying feel like qualifying again, and to stop races feeling like a battery strategy game with cars attached, we'll find out soon enough. I've talked a lot about Formula 1 problems on my channel, but you might want something more positive after this negative story. A documentary about one of my favorite F1 drivers, Sebastian Vettel, might help you with that.